Today, I want to show you the bundle deploy function. In the last video, we already saw how to deploy a single bundle. So today, we will go one step further. We will take a closer look at the additional functions inside the multi-bundle deploy panel. To start, we go back to our XDala Workbench. Here we open the XRC-137 Builder. For this tutorial, we need a bundle that we want to deploy. We take this bundle from the contract manager. So we open the contract manager, select our bundle, and click Deploy Bundle. The bundle is now loaded into the multi-bundle deploy panel. This is the central place where we can validate, configure, and deploy our complete bundle. At the top, we can already see that our wallet is connected. We did this in the previous video, so if you are not sure how to connect your wallet, please watch that video first. Now we can look at the first important function in this panel. Validation. The validation checks the complete process. That means it checks whether the structure is correct, whether the syntax is valid, and whether the required payload fields are available. Also checks whether all field names are written correctly. This is important because the different contracts inside the process need to work together. In this example, we have a small validation error. We added an underscore to one of the payload fields. To fix this error, first, we switch to expert mode. Then we open our bundle and scroll down to the validation error. Here we can see exactly where the problem is located. At this point, we have two options. We can inspect the error directly in the JSON code, or we can use the Fix Dialog to correct the problem in a more guided way. In this tutorial, we use the Fix Dialog, so we click Fix. Now the panel shows us the error again at the top. It also gives us a possible solution. In this case, the suggested solution is to rename the field. The invalid underscore should be removed. So the field name follows the correct convention. This is exactly what we want to do. Of course, we could also enter a different name manually, but in this example, the suggested name is already correct, so we select the suggested fix. Now we have to decide how this fix should be applied. We can apply it only to the current XRC-137 item, or we can apply it globally to the complete process chain. We apply this fix globally, so we click Apply Global, confirm with Yes, and then apply the change to the item. Now the validation error is fixed. At the top, we can select the signer. The signer defines who will deploy the contracts. This can be the connected wallet, or it can be an alias that we have configured before. In this example, we select the local signer. This is useful because it saves us a lot of manual confirmations during deployment. If we use the connected wallet directly, for example MetaMask, we have to confirm and sign every single deployment transaction manually. For a small test, this may be okay. But for larger bundles, this can quickly become annoying. With a configured signer alias, we can make this process much smoother. How to create and configure such a signer will be shown in another video. For now, we select the local signer. The panel immediately shows us that a local signer already exists for this wallet. It is also already configured, but at the moment, it is still locked. So now we unlock it. We click Unlock. Then we enter the password that we created during the local signer setup. After entering the password, we click Unlock again. Now, the local signer is ready. That means we can use it for the deployment without confirming every transaction manually in the wallet. Another function in the bundle. Deploy panel is the worker setting. Here we can define how many workers should be used during deployment. In most cases, one worker is enough. But if we deploy many bundles, for example during tests, we can use multiple workers. Multiple workers can run deployment tasks in parallel. This can make the deployment process faster. In our example, we do not need that. So we leave the worker count at 1. The next helpful function is Show Deploy Plan. The deploy plan shows us who will deploy each individual contract. Because we selected the local signer at the top, this signer is inherited by all contracts in the bundle. So by default, all contracts will use the local signer, but we can also override the signer for individual contracts. This gives us more control when different parts of a process chain should be deployed with different signers. This can be especially useful for wake-ups, for tests, or when we want to deploy multiple bundles with different wallets. For example, one contract could use the local signer, and another contract could use a trigger signer. So here, on the individual contract, we can define a different signer. This overrides the global signer setting from the top. In this example, we select the trigger signer for this contract. The deploy plan updates immediately. Now we can see that this specific contract would be deployed with the trigger signer. The next important function is the deployment strategy. This setting controls how the contracts should be deployed. Here, we can choose whether we always want to deploy contracts as new, or whether the system should check first if something has changed. This is important when we work with existing deployed contracts. The check and deploy mode checks whether the content of a contract has changed for a specific address, so the system compares the current bundle content with what is already deployed. For example, imagine that we add one field to an XRC-137 item, but maybe this small change does not affect the complete process chain. In that case, we may not want to redeploy every contract again. Maybe only one part of the process has changed, and the other contracts can stay exactly as they are. That is where check and deploy becomes useful. So in this case, we can select check and deploy. Then, only the contracts that really changed are deployed again. This keeps the deployment cleaner and avoids unnecessary new deployments. All unchanged contracts keep their existing addresses. So if nothing changed in a contract, its address stays the same and nothing is replaced. This deployment strategy can also be overridden for each individual contract. For example, we can set one contract to deploy new, even if the global strategy is set to check and deploy. Or we can choose update existing for a specific contract. Existing means that an existing contract is updated directly. We only have placeholders. That means there is no existing on-chain contract yet that we can update or replace. Another option in the bundle deploy panel is bundle validation. This controls how strict the deployment should be when validation errors exist. Here we can decide whether deployment should still be allowed, even if the validation shows errors. This should be used carefully. Sometimes, a payload field may not be available yet. For example, it may be created later by a wake-up. In that situation, the bundle deploy panel may show an error even though the setup is intended. Normally, validation errors would block the deployment. But if we know what we are doing and still want to deploy, we can switch to dirty mode. Dirty mode allows the deployment even with validation errors. For normal use, however, it is safer to keep the validation mode on strict. The panel also provides several general bundle actions. We can add another bundle, download the current bundle, clear everything from the panel, save the bundle into the contract manager, or replace an existing bundle. These functions are useful when we manage several bundles or want to store the result after deployment. But for this tutorial, we do not need to change anything here, so we leave everything as it is. The bundle is ready, the signer is selected, and the deploy settings are configured. Because we took some time to explain the functions, our unlocked signer alias has locked again. This can happen for security reasons, so we unlock it once more. We enter the password again, and then click Unlock. Now the signer is ready again. The deployment is unlocked, and we can start the deploy. So we click Deploy. During deployment, the panel shows us the progress. For example, we can see how many contracts have already been deployed and how many contracts are still waiting. If we notice that something is wrong, we can cancel the deployment at any time. This is useful if we selected the wrong signer. After that, their contract addresses are inserted into the XRC-729 process contract. Now the deployment is complete. After the deployment, we have two main options. We can download the complete updated bundle, or we can save it into the contract manager. Because this bundle already exists in the contract manager, we do not want to overwrite the wrong version by accident. So first we go back to the contract manager. Here, we click Reset. This gives us a clean state before we save the newly deployed bundle. Now we go back to the bundle deploy panel. Here, we save the newly updated bundle into the contract manager. The import is now complete. We can see that 4 items were imported, and nothing was skipped. The complete bundle is now stored in the contract manager, including the deployed addresses. That is important, because we can now continue working with the deployed version. Let us quickly check one contract. We open the contract, go to Actions and select View. Here we can see that the deployed address is now stored in the contract, so the deployment result was saved correctly. The contract manager has many more functions. We will look at those functions in a separate video. That brings us to the end of this bundle deploy. Overview. We have loaded a bundle, validated it, fixed an error, configured the signer, checked the deploy plan, selected the deployment strategy, and deployed the bundle. Of course, we can also view the deployed addresses directly inside the bundle deploy panel. This makes it easy to confirm which contracts were deployed and which addresses were created. The status deployed shows us that everything was completed successfully. So our bundle is now deployed, and the deployed addresses are available.
Have fun with this example. Be creative, play around with it, develop it further, and feel free to share your ideas with our community on our community channels. Also subscribe to our channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any future videos. Have fun and see you next time.